Welcome back to the Profit Builder Unscripted. Today we're talking about how do you get more profits on your bottom line and be more intentional about how you plan for that in your business. All right, let's jump in. In our last session, I talked about what is the value of putting your goals down on a piece of paper and identifying in writing what your measurable strategic goals are, whether that's like revenue, gross profit margin goals, cash in the bank goals, how you're going to grow your team, how you're going to invest in your business, sort of like some big picture goals that you want to accomplish in this year in your business. And today I'm going to talk about how do you start with that document. I had shared with you this goal sheet that I have all my clients fill out every year that helps you kind of think through what are some questions that you might want to answer about how you want to be working in your business this year from a financial perspective or from an investment perspective or from a growth and development perspective. And then this session, I want to talk about like why do an operating budget? Why take it to that next step and create an operating budget for your business? And a lot of times I think that people think that an operating budget is just like, oh, I put numbers on a piece of paper. I don't know if they're going to come to fruition, or I've done that before and it hasn't turned out, so I don't want to do it at all because I don't want to be disappointed. And what I'm going to share with you is that I have a different perspective on all that. One of the things that I have seen over the years in doing this with clients is that when you have an operating budget and when you pay attention to how you're doing compared to your operating budget, as well as set in place some feedback systems to help you actually accomplish those goals, it is the difference that makes the difference in being able to be more profitable and more successful in your business. There's such a great correlation to how we run our businesses and how we run projects, right? So just like in doing a project, you start with being really clear about like, all right, what's the current conditions when somebody brings you on and says they want you to do a project. You look at what's working, what's not working, what needs to be different. And then you look at and have this conversation about what would they like it to look like. And then you create a blueprint or a schematic that identifies what's it going to look like. And then what's the next step you do? You start with the end in mind. You look back at what your starting point is and you ask the question, what's it going to take to get from where they're starting out to where they would like to be? And in that process, you develop an operating budget or a budget for a project budget, right? And you develop a schedule and you develop some, you identify what resources you're going to need, materials and labor and all that, right? The same thing is true for our businesses, right? Like, from doing projects that when you plan it well at the front end, when you have a clear idea of what it's going to cost, the process of developing that helps you understand what it's going to take to do it. First of all. Second of all, is that ideally you're looking up on regular intervals to go, am I on track with the budget that I set? When you do those two things in your business as a whole, just like when you do that with projects, you're more successful on projects, you're more profitable on projects. The same thing is true in your business. And doing an operating budget isn't just about taking last year's numbers and throwing 2% or 10% on top of it and going, hey, that's good, right? Just like when you do a project budget for a project, you look at it and you go, hey, like what's really the scope here? What is it going to cost? An example for your business would be one of your largest line items is labor. To actually look up and go, all right, what's my labor cost going to be for non-billable time, right? Billable time is all up under cost of goods sold, and there's a direct relationship with revenue and cost of goods sold, that if your revenue goes up, your cost of goods sold is going to go up. But all the rest of the labor, when I pay people vacation, holidays, my office staff, my estimator, my administrative person, like marketing person, all those people are part of your overhead cost, your salary. Those costs are very much something that you want to plan for, right? You want to look at like, what's that going to cost me? More often than not, that is your largest overhead cost line item. And then also looking at like, what do I want to spend on marketing? What's our plan for marketing? Where are we going to spend dollars and cents? And all of that, just like a project budget, when you're doing a budget and you're figuring out what's it going to cost and you're figuring out what's it going to look like, you keep in mind the whole thing that the customer said at the front end, which was the customer said, hey, this is my budget and I want to stay within that budget. And you're mindful of that when you're building out the budget for that project. Well, the same thing is true for your business, right? So last time in my last recording, I talked about setting goals, right? You have a revenue goal, gross profit margin goal, a net profit margin goal. You have a cash reserve goal. You have a goal for how much money you want to make, personally, your salary, your take home. So as you're looking at this, you're going to compare, you're going to build your budget according to that. Now, this isn't a session on, I'm not going to show my screen. I'm not going to go through a spreadsheet. Like I'll drop a couple links below of a couple of resources that I think will help you out in this regard. But I'm really wanting to just encourage you to set a financial plan for yourself. Because, and I was really compelled to do this because it was interesting, at the end of every year, I sit down, well, I actually more often than that, but particularly at the end of the year, I sit down with all my clients and we look at like, all right, what do you want to create this year? But we're also looking at how did you do last year? How did you do compared to your budget? The great thing about doing that is that it's always so great to see how when people have planned for what they want to have happened, they're much more likely to actually be able to have it happen because they had a plan for it. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's great. I can put anything down on a piece of paper in terms of the numbers of what I want to create in revenue, but how do I know if I can do that? I'm thinking of a guy in my contractors collective group, and Danny asked this question, like, how do I know if it's a good number to set as a revenue goal? And I say, well, here's a couple of things I would say. One is, what did you do in the previous years, right? What do you know that you have been able to generate in terms of revenue? That's one acid test. The second acid test is I said, let's look at what you have in backlog. This was such a great process to do with him too. And I'm going to drop a link below for where you can get my template for tracking your backlog. Backlog is, what do I already have in contract? And the first number he gave me when we were talking, I'm not going to share the numbers with you, but the first number he gave me was, I was like, oh, that's pretty good. All right, so that's your starting number. But then when we started to fill out this backlog worksheet that said, here's what he had in contract, here's what was remaining to be billed for the year, here's what was in contract that hadn't started that would be billed in this next year. And then there's another section on there that's like, hey, what do you have that's like 90% or more, that you really have a good confidence level that they've either given you a deposit or they've verbally given you a yes, that it's going to go. And when we started to tally all that up, it was quite a bit more, like 30% more than what he told me originally was his backlog. And like, as we did the process, he was like, oh my gosh, that's really amazing. And I was like, okay, now if you, and he set a goal of a certain amount of money, and this backlog actually was going to take care of about 75% of it. Now he's like, oh, that's a much more reachable number. Now I can do that because I think about like there's going to be a certain amount of change orders and it's the beginning of the year and I know I can sell more projects. Now his projects have long durations, and so it's, you take that into consideration, like how long does it actually take until you can bill? But when you can see it, it gives you such a different relationship with your numbers that now looking at a revenue goal of, let's say for you, it's, maybe it's 2 million, maybe it's 5 million, maybe it's 10 million, I don't know, whatever it is. But look up and go, what do I have in backlog? What do I have in already signed work? So that I can start to build a little more confidence of what would it take to sell that much more work? So I'm going to just recap what I just said because this is super important. One is have some big goals on revenue, gross profit margin, net profit margin, cash reserves. Build an operating budget that will support being able to reach those goals. A really key way to know if that revenue goal is achievable is to track what your backlog is, write it down, look it up, go look at all your open contracts. What have I not billed yet? What am I going to build? What have I not started that I'm going to build? So that you can know, what am I starting out with in booked work? And then how much more do I have to sell? And what would it take to sell that? And if you do it by month, which my template will, it's free, so grab it, it's worth it. If you start to track it by month, now you can see, oh, I got to drop off in 6 months or 3 months or whatever that is for you. And then you go, all right, what do I have to do to sell that much? Here's the other cool thing that happens when you do that. Now, this is the great thing about doing a backlog report. And I recommend that you keep this updated like every month. It starts to take you out of the category of worrying all the time and puts you into the category of, I have clarity. I know how much it is. I know when I need that work. Now, when you're having conversations with people, everything doesn't become of equal importance. Now you're starting to focus on, oh, I need 300,000 in that month. I need $500,000 by that month. All right, what do I have in my pipeline of potential work? How am I going to get that work in? Now I can be more strategic when I know how much I have to fill in backlog of additional work to sell. So the more you have feedback like that, it will really help you get more confident in being able to build your budget and build your revenue goals. In terms of gross profit margin goals, I would suggest that you look at the last few years. What have you done in gross profit margin? That's a good place to start. We could have a whole conversation here for 2 hours about gross profit margin. And I'll probably do a different episode about that because it is a contract you live and die by it. But at least to give you a benchmark, you can start and look at your historical information. And then there's one more piece to all of this, which is just like when you build a budget for a project and that project begins, you start to pay attention to and look at, how am I doing compared to how I budgeted this project to start with. The same thing is true when you build an operating budget for your business. If you're in QuickBooks, put your budget into QuickBooks. If you're in some other software, put it in there. And then every month, look at your budget versus actual and go, how am I doing? Am I on track? Am I off track? What's working? What's not working? Am I spending too much money for the amount of money I have coming in? Do I need to cut expenses? Do I need to sell more? Is that work delayed? I always look at, when I'm looking at budget versus actual financial reports, right? It's got the actual P&L data and the budget P&L data. I always ask the question, are we on track or off track? And then I ask the question, if we're off track and under budget, did the revenue just push out or did it go away? Is it just a delay or is it going to go away? And the same thing with expenses. Just asking those two simple questions alone will start to have you have a better sense of how is the year going to turn out. Now, why that, along with doing a backlog report, why is that important? It's the same thing like looking at your job cost reports, looking at where you are budget versus actual, or doing cost to complete on projects to see where you're going to end up and looking at the end of the project. The more you can see where you're headed before it's history, the more you have choices and options about intervening in that future before it's history. That's where real control comes. So I'm just going to I know I've been talking about a lot in this session, so I'm just going to recap really quickly a couple of suggestions that I have here for you. And this is if you're somebody who wants to increase the profitability of your business, if you want to increase your cash flow, if you want to feel like you're in more control over the results that you create in your business, this is one of the keys to doing that. So It starts with what I talked about in the last session, which is just get really like set some goals about revenue, gross profit margin, net profit margin, cash reserves, where you're going to invest in your business, where you're going to do training, where you're going to hire people, so on and so forth. Get that down. And then create an operating budget where you're going to take that information and you're going to make a plan just like you do for a project. You're going to take that information and go, what's it going to take to do that? Right? What's it going to cost me? Where's that revenue coming from? Do a backlog report so that you can see what you already have and what you're starting out the year with. And then look at like, all right, come up with some thoughts and strategy about how am I going to fill the empty spots, right? How am I going to, if I still need $2 million in work or whatever that number is for you, where am I going to come, where's it going to come from? So make a plan for that. And then just like a project, track your results every month. Get your budget once you're done with it, put it into QuickBooks, and then look at your budget versus actual. Where are you on track? Where are you off track? What do you need to do to change that? How do you still reach those core goals that you set? Just like you do on a project. I encourage you to include your bookkeeper in this process or whoever's doing your accounting. Make this collaborative process. You don't have to do this on your own. Down below, I'm dropping a link to a couple of different resources that will help you in this process. And I hope you'll give it a shot. You started this business because you wanted to be able to have choices and options about how much you make, how you spend your time, do what you love to do. This is one of those key core things that will really help you be able to accomplish those goals. So feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. Pop a comment below if you want to pop a comment below. If you know somebody else who would get value from this, please share it. And I look forward to seeing you next time on the Profit Builder Unscripted. Thank you for being here.